In this video, I'm going to try to talk about the who, what, where, and when of the extraordinary phenomenon around Joseph the Hesychgast and cave dweller, the elder Ephraim of Philithoa in Arizona. And I'll be using Elder Ephraim of Philithoa in Arizona's book as my source material. So let's start with Elder Joseph the Hesychgast in the world as Francis. So Francis Cotis was born 1897 in Paros in the Cyclades, the Cyclades. Francis goes to Athens to work in 1914 at the age of 17. Francis joins the Navy in 1915. He's there for 2 years, and then he becomes a merchant at the age of 20. But he's been thinking of monasticism all this while. But the 1918 Balkan War, plus the Spanish flu, delayed his going to Mount Athos, which he finally did in 1921, and he's 24 years old now. At first, Francis tries the brotherhood of Elder Daniel of Kathanakia. His dates are 1846 to 1929. Francis is living in a cave. Francis is a disciple of Elder Kalinikos for a while, 1853 to 1930 are his dates. Francis is near the Great Lavra, and Francis is attending the liturgy of a different Elder Daniel. This is Elder Daniel the Hesychast, and he's celebrating liturgies in the cell of St. Peter the Athonite. And Francis is at the Holy Forerunner near the Great Lavra. He's at the Holy Protection at Vigla, and he's staying with Father Hariton for a while, and this is all happening in 1 year. So Francis is on Mount Athos for 1 year as a layman, and that's 1921 to 1922. And then something happens. He meets Father Arsenios. Why? Because Elder Daniel of Kathanakia sends Father Arsenios to meet Francis. Pause. So that was the early life of Francis in his first year on Mount Athos, but now I have to go back and give you the biographical background to Father Arsenios, and then we'll come back on track with their meeting. Right, so Father Arsenios was born in the world as Anastasios in northern Turkey. They fled. He was born in 1886. They all fled to the Caucasus from the Turks in 1898. He's aged 12. In 1910, he is born in his nephew Haralambos, and Anastasios becomes the godfather to his nephew. And at this stage, Anastasios is 24 years old. Right, what happens next? Anastasios, he's been wanting to pursue monasticism, so he goes to Jerusalem to do so, passing through Constantinople in 1910. And there, in Jerusalem, he joins the monastery of St. Salvos, and he takes the name Father Anatolios. And Father Anatolios goes as Father Anatolios now to Bethlehem, to a monastery there for a few years. Then he goes to Mount Athos, again through Constantinople. He needs the permissions from the Ottomans to get there. And he joins the monastery of Stavro Nikita for a few years. At the monastery of Stavro Nikita, Father Anatolios now takes the name Arsenios and becomes a great schema monk with that name. Then what happens? Now, Father Arsenios goes to consult with Elder Daniel of Kathanakia, and it's now that Elder Daniel of Kathanakia sends Father Arsenios to meet Francis the layman. And Father Arsenios is 12 years older than Francis the layman, and they strike that extraordinary deal whereby Father Arsenios will submit and become the disciple of the layman Francis. So now it's the two of them, and we'll carry on with the narrative. So Father Arsenios, Francis, they've been living under remote guidance in obedience to Daniel of Katanakea for 2 or 3 years, but they need full discipleship. They need to live with elders. So Daniel of Katanakea sends him to join 2 elders of their own, and these elders are Elder Joseph and Elder Ephraim the barrel maker, and Elders Joseph and Ephraim the barrel maker are in Katanakea, and now it's at the end of 1923 when they do so. So it looks like we're going to be talking about a period coming up of 5 years, and in these 5 years, Francis and Father Arsenius are under the guidance of Elders Joseph and Ephraim the barrel maker in Katanakea. What's going to happen? A few things. I'm going to have to just quickly talk about the calendar issue, but we're really going to delve into that later. But what happens? 1924, pretty much straight away, the Church of Greece imposes the new calendar under the aegis of the Ecumenical Patriarchate. And the Holy Mountain takes a particular stance on this issue. They're going to not observe the new calendar. The Holy Mountain as a whole is going to observe the old calendar, but they will not sever themselves from the Ecumenical Patriarchate. Whereas there is an extreme position held by what we'll call, zealots, quote unquote. At Katanakea, they disagree with this position of the Holy Mountain, and they do sever themselves from commemorating the Ecumenical Patriarchate. They sever themselves from the Ecumenical Patriarchate and thereby the rest of the Holy Mountain. So the Zealot Fathers at Katanakea are out of step with the rest of the Holy Mountain. So why is that mentioned right here, right now? It's because Francis is tonsured in 1925, after a couple of years, taking the name Joseph as a great schemer monk, and it is with permission from the great Lavra, but that permission was given reluctantly due to the calendar issue. Right, what else happens during this period? Elder Joseph, the elder of elders, our Elder Joseph and Father Arsenius, he reposes, and Elder Ephraim the barrel maker, the remaining elder, Elder Ephraim the barrel maker, move with Father Joseph and Father Arsenius, the new Father Joseph, our Father Joseph the Hesychgast, to a different location in 1928. They moved to St. Basil's Skeet, and St. Basil's Skeet is also in Katanakea. And what is St. Basil's Skeet? It has 8 huts. It's under the jurisdiction of the great Lavra, and as I said, they've moved in 1928. And also residing there is Father Matthew Karparthakis, and this ties into the calendar issue as well, because the later group known as Matthewites are followers of this Father Matthew, but that's in the future to come. So anyway, the Brotherhood consists of Elder Ephraim, now the barrel maker, our Father Joseph, the Hesychast, and Father Arsenius. They built their own huts. They prepared their own huts. They are being visited by Elder Sophrony, whom we know as being of Essex. Elder Sophrony, the disciple of St. Silouan at the monastery of Pantalaimon. Now, Father Ephraim, the barrel maker, he himself reposes. So both elders repose, Father Joseph and Father Ephraim, the barrel maker. And now, our Father Joseph, the Hesychast, becomes a proper elder at the age of 31 because he inherits the eldership of the reposed Father Ephraim. So at the end of that 5-year period, it's a bit of a landmark. Our Elder Joseph, the Hesychast, is a proper elder, so to speak. And now what happens, they spend a bit of time in 1929, that is our Elder Joseph and Father Arsenios, travelling outside of the Holy Mountain, seemingly for family purposes, but religiously for family purposes. You'll see what I mean shortly. Elder Joseph sponsors his mother to become a nun. She takes the name Agathangeli. What else? They visit Father Arsenios' sister, the nun Epraxia. She's in Egina. They visit Father Arsenius' relatives in Drama. Elder Joseph meets a group of pious widows. They're all young widows. They've been widowed through the violence of Ataturk. He meets them in Thessalonica, and they become nuns under his guidance. And he continues that guidance via correspondence. And our Elder Joseph and Father Arsenius, they return to Mount Athos in September 1929. Right, now what happens? 1929 to 30, Elder Daniel of Kartanakia reposes. Also, Elder Daniel the Hesychgast reposes. Temporarily, our Elder Joseph and Father Arsenius become disciples of Father Anthony, who was a successor of Elder Daniel of Kartanakia, but that didn't work out. What else? Our Elder Joseph and Father Arsenius, they wander about. They wander about for 1.5 years looking for another elder. They hear about Saint Silouan at Panteleimon, but Father Arsenius doesn't want to embarrass his Elder Joseph, because if they went there, Father Arsenius can speak Russian. He would be speaking in Russian in front of his elder, and that would be embarrassing to his elder. So they declined to go to visit Saint Silouan. But they're visited many times by Elder Sophrony, the disciple of Saint Silouan. Next, 1930 to 1933, Elder Joseph goes to Drama. He restores a monastery to house his nuns in. He tonsors 5 nuns. The sisterhood have a rough time there. They're lied about to the bishop, and they're persecuted and pressured by the local bishop. The sisterhood are also threatened by partisan soldiers. And what else? From Drama, Elder Joseph has a vision about of concern about his own brother in the flesh, Nicholas, who is in Athens. So Elder Joseph goes to Athens to visit his brother Nicholas. His brother Nicholas figures later on in our narrative. The sisterhood, meanwhile, move away from Drama to avoid that episcopal pressure, and they move to Uranopolis, just outside the Holy Mountain, and Elder Joseph returns to Mount Athos in 1933. So they're still living in isolation, still looking for spiritual guidance, looking for an elder. They spent time at St. Basil's Skeet in summer. They're on the summit of Mount Athos. In winter, they're in the chapel of the Panagia near the summit. And it is while they're at St. Basil's Skeet that Elder Joseph starts to doubt the extremity of some of Father Matthew's extreme views. Remember that they're all zealots here at this stage. All right, the Brotherhood. They're joined at St. Basil's Skeet by Father John from northern Epiros. Don't confuse him with our Elder Ephraim of Philithea and Arizona. It's a different John. And this Father John is the first layman to become a disciple of our Elder Joseph the Hesychast. What else? Joining them is Father Athanasius. And Father Athanasius is the aforementioned brother Nicholas in the flesh to Elder Joseph. And he joins them in 1933. He's 10 years younger than his older brother, Elder Joseph the Hesychast. Just leaping forward to a factoid, Father Athanasius, Elder Joseph's brother Nicholas, dies at New Skeet in 1983 at the age of 76. All right, come back to our narrative. Elder Joseph the Hesychgast is attracting many visiting fathers who come for spiritual advice. I'm going to whiz through a few names, and you can check these in the book. Father Ermolaus, Father Theokletos, Father Ierasimus Menagius, who had already been at St. Basil's Skeet from 1925. Father Athanasius, as we mentioned, another Father Athanasius Campanaus. In 1935, he's 68 years old. He's from the Great Lavra and later returns to the Great Lavra. There's Father Athanagoras Valsamakis, and visiting them is also Father Ephraim the Confessor in Volos, and here's a sidebar about Father Ephraim the Confessor in Volos. He's a leader of the old calendar movement in Volos, and he joins Elder Joseph at the small skeet of St. Anne, and then he is at another skeet at St. Anne's, and then leaping into the future, this Father Ephraim the Confessor from Volos travels Montreal, USA, dies in 1984. We'll be talking about this Father Ephraim the Confessor a bit later. There's a Father Basil, and visiting him is Father Pantaleimon from Boston. Right. What else happens? Elder Joseph the Hesychgast makes a flying visit to Thessalonica to see the dying nun Theodora. I'm not going to talk about the other sisterhood and so on, but you can read about that in the book. I'm going to concern myself with the Holy Fathers on Mount Athos here. And now we're going to pause to talk about another figure, and that's Papa Ephraim of Katonakia. So Papa Ephraim of Katonakia is a disciple of Papa Nikephoros, and with him is Father Procopius, who is also a disciple of Father Nikephoros. So they live with their elder, Papa Nikephoros. Now, Papa Ephraim of Katonakia, he's born in 1912 and joined Papa Nikephoros in 1933 at the age of 21. And he meets Elder Joseph in 1935. And Papa Ephraim becomes a priest in 1936, and he starts to visit St. Basil's Skeet to serve the liturgy for them at St. Basil's Skeet. And Papa Ephraim of Katonakia becomes a spiritual disciple of Elder Joseph, but he remains by agreement under the formal discipleship and resides with his elder Nikephoros. And leaping into the future, this Papa Ephraim of Katonakia dies in 1998. So anyway, back to our narrative. It's 1936, St. Basil's Skeet, and the brotherhood with Elder Joseph consists of only Father Arsenius, Father Joseph's brother, now Father Athanasius, and Father John. Now, at this point, the book pauses to describe what happens next, because in early 1938, they leave St. Basil's Skeet and move to the small skeet of St. Anne, which is near St. Anne's Skeet, and Papa Ephraim of Katonakia helps him to move. And at this stage, Elder Joseph is gaining the reputation for being deluded. We'll talk a little bit about why, but part of it is according to the rigour of their schedule at the small skeet of St. Anne's. It seems incredibly extraordinary to the rest of the monks of Mount Athos. And because of that reputation for delusion, the Elder Paisius the New, the famous one that we all know of, wants to visit Elder Joseph the Hesychgast, but is deterred from doing so by others who say, no, he's deluded, don't go. But Elder Paisius later realizes that was a mistake when he reads the writings of Elder Joseph the Hesychgast. Just mention a young monk, Father Ionakios, from the Brotherhood of Papa Ananias at the Heart of the Holy Cross. They had 10 brothers, and they were at St. Anne's Skeet. This young monk, Father Ionakios, is receiving spiritual training from Elder Joseph the Hesychgast, but Father Ionakios soon dies of tuberculosis. Now, while the Brotherhood are at the small skit of St. Anne's, we've got to talk about the German occupation. So, just a bit of history. Italy declares war on the 28th of October 1940, gives rise to Hochi Day. German occupation in 1941, what did that mean? 300,000 Greeks die of starvation in the cities that, in that year, 1941 to 2. So you can see that the economy is really paralysed, I'd say, and that affects the Brotherhood at St. Anne's Skeet. We'll talk about why shortly. But having moved to the small skit of St. Anne's in 1938, the book that I'm using kind of has a book within a book at this point. The book within a book at this point talks about the life, the way of life, the daily life at the small skit of St. Anne's, and it's packed with spiritual counsel as well. So on the surface of it, it looks like we're going to jump over a lot of years, which we are, but that's the reason why the narrative is switching from historical detail to describing daily life and describing spiritual events. Right, they're going to be at the small skit of St. Anne's for 15 years. So that's from 1938 to 1953. In 1947, they're joined by Father Joseph from Cyprus, and he is to be the later Elder Joseph of Vatapedi. And the strange thing is that now, because of the Greek Civil War and the economic deterioration thereby, the economy of this Brotherhood at the small skit of St. Anne's is based on their woodcraft carving of crosses, and these weren't selling. So although Father Joseph of Cyprus, the future Elder Joseph of Vatapedi, joins the Brotherhood, he is sent out to work at the monasteries in the fields and only visiting the small skit of St. Anne when he can. So he joined in 1947, and this disorder continued until 1953 when it abated. And then Father Joseph of Cyprus was able to settle and reside permanently at the small skit of St. Anne's. Right, what next happens? Now we have to talk about our Elder Ephraim of Philadelphia in Arizona and talk about his life. And he was born Ioannis Johnny Moretis in Volos, from Volos. He was born in 1928. Future, he died 2019. Now, he was a disciple of Elder Ephraim the Confessor of Volos that we had mentioned before. And Elder Ephraim the Confessor was a disciple of Elder Joseph the Hesychgast, and he goes as a hieromonk during the German occupation, so from 1941. He goes to one of the two old calendar churches in Volos, and that's where Johnny Moretis meets him. And not only does he meet him, he becomes a spiritual child. Johnny Moretis becomes a spiritual child of Elder Ephraim the Confessor in Volos. And this is from the ages of 14 to 19. The young Johnny wants to become a monk, but his elder Ephraim the Confessor dissuades him from going to Mount Athos, saying that he needs Johnny to stay with him to help him build a monastery. And that goes on for 5 years. And in 1947, same year that Elder Joseph of Cyprus, Father Joseph of Cyprus, joined the Brotherhood, in 1947, the young Johnny sends a gift to Elder Joseph of Hesychgast at St. Anne's, small St. Anne's Skeet, and it's a gift of some pasta, some food, and that's no small gift at that time. And then Johnny finally gets the blessing on September the 26th, 1947, to go to young Johnny finally gets the blessing of Elder Ephraim to go to Mount Athos, and he joins the Brotherhood of Elder Joseph the Hesychgast at Small St. Anne's Skeet on September the 26th, 1947. In the meantime, Papa Ephraim of Katonakia is continuing to liturgize for them. Remember, they're all still zealots, so to speak. What else? At the small skate of St. Anne, life is very rough. There's very little water, for example. Now, our young Johnny Moretis, after 9 months only, is tonsured into the great schema and takes the name Ephraim, by which we know him now, and that happens on July the 13th, 1948. But because they're so-called zealots, they're not on the official roster of Mount Athos, and this becomes significant later. All right, what's their way of life? Well, wooden crosses is their product. They make 8 to 10 of them each day. In 1949, the police are looking for Johnny Moretis to do his military service because his tonsure isn't registered or recognised. That's the name by which they know him. And Elder Joseph hides Johnny Moretis, our Elder Ephraim, in a cave until the danger has passed. Elder Ephraim the Confessor from Volos visits. That's our Elder Ephraim's former elder. But our Elder Ephraim refrains from talking through discipline, guards his tongue. What else? After a few months at the small skit of St. Anne's, our young Elder Ephraim, his health deteriorates due to the harsh conditions and the harsh ascesis. He gets first-stage tuberculosis. So Yeronda Joseph, the Hesychast, makes him eat well, eat butter, and even eat meat. And then a few years later, young Elder Ephraim gets anthrax, and by this stage, Yeronda Joseph the Hesychast is allowing medical treatment because formerly, as Francis, he had been hard set against doctors and medical treatment. So that's life at the small skit of St. Anne's for about 11 years, but now we're going to backtrack and we're going to talk about the calendar issue, and this will be quite detailed and take quite a bit of time. So anyway, Government of Greece adopts a new calendar by royal decree in 1923 on the 18th of January, and at that time the Ecumenical Patriarchate asks the churches of Greece, Alexandria, Cyprus, Antioch, and Romania to adopt the new calendar, and the Church of Greece, as we said, does adopt it in 1924 on the 10th of March. Alexandria, Antioch, Romania, and Bulgaria follow suit. And that means that the old calendarists have no bishop, and they have no bishop for 11 years until 1935. So what happens? In 1935, Archbishop Chrysostomus Kavoridis of Florina joins the old calendarists, and he's followed by Bishop Germanos of Demetriados and Chrysostomus of Zakynthos. So the old calendarists have got 3 bishops. And these 3 bishops make 4 new bishops. Now they've got 7. And one of the new bishops is the monk Matthew Karparthakis of St. Basil's Skeet, known to Elder Joseph the Hesychast that we referred to earlier. So these 7 bishops are disputing with each other for a couple of years. Most lay people are siding with the old calendar at this time. And then in 1937, Bishop Chrysostomus of Florina declares and proclaims for himself his following position, being a position of objection from within the Church of Greece, and that the mysteries of the Church of Greece are to be accepted. Now, in English, they're using words like valid or having grace, but I'm just going to use the word accepted or rejected, that kind of thing. So the position of Archbishop Chrysostomus at this stage is a quote-unquote moderate one, whereas Bishop Matthew and the zealots with him, their position is more extreme. What do? They anathematize Bishop Chrysostomus of Florina, and what else do? They reject the mysteries of the Church of Greece. For them, the mysteries of the Church of Greece are unacceptable. What else is happening? Mount Athos, as we said, remains on the old calendar, but they will still commemorate the Ecumenical Patriarch, unlike the Zealots, who will not commemorate the Ecumenical Patriarchate. Vatapedi flipped temporarily to the new calendar, but went back to the old. Elder Joseph the Hesychast is convinced by the extreme zealot position that Bishop Matthew encourages him to take. So what does he do? Elder Joseph the Hesychast sends a diatribe to Bishop Chrysostomus of Florina condemning the mysteries of the Church of Greece. So in 1937, something happens. Elder Joseph the Hesychast and Papa Ephraim of Katonaki both have visions, and these visions cause them to revise their position, their extreme position, their zealot position on Bishop Chrysostomus, and they apologize to Bishop Chrysostomus, and their apology is accepted by Bishop Chrysostomus. So that means that Elder Joseph the Hesychast now accepts both the old and also the new calendars. And that is the state of things at the Small Skeet of St. Anne's when Johnny Moretti, our future Elder Ephraim, joins them in 1947. So the Brotherhood at the Small Skeet of St. Anne's, including the newly joined Father Joseph the Cypriot, are accepting that moderate position. Then what happens? Well, in 1950, there's an encyclical published by the old calendar bishops, Chrysostomus of Florina, Germanus of Kyklades, Christopher of Christianopolis, and Polycarp of Diavlia. And in this encyclical, they now say that the new calendar's mysteries are unacceptable, i.e. the Church of Greece's mysteries are unacceptable. And they say that anyone baptized by the new calendar must be received by chrismation now in the call it true, quote-unquote, Orthodox Church. There is a sting in the tail here. Bishop Chrysostomus signed this encyclical unwillingly, declaring he signed what he didn't believe. So this comes as a shock to Elder Joseph the Hesychast, and it comes as a shock to his brotherhood as well. So what happens? Fathers Arsenius, Athanasius, Papa Ephraim, and Elder Nikiforos, they resist strongly to Elder Joseph the Hesychast's change of mind, because that that shock, because that caused a change of mind on the zealot issue. So Fathers Arsenius, Athanasius, Papa Ephraim, and Elder Nikiforos strongly want to remain zealot, whereas the younger ones, Father Joseph the Cypriot and our Father Ephraim, the former Johnny Morettis, are quick to obey their Elder Joseph the Hesychast and follow his change of mind. So what is this change of mind? Yeronda Joseph the Hesychast, he sends Father Athanasius to submit the brotherhood now to the great Lavra and the Ecumenical Patriarchate, no longer zealots, to be registered along and to be in step with the rest of Mount Athos. Now, I know we're talking about the calendar issue as a sidebar away from our narrative, but now I have to have a sidebar from the sidebar and talk about ordinations. So while they were still zealots, and only Papa Ephraim of Katonika was serving them, Yeronda Joseph the Hesychast intended Father Haralambos, whom we haven't really spoken about yet, to be a priest, and Father Ephraim of our Father Ephraim, Johnny Morettis, to be a deacon, so that they can have their services and not just rely on Papa Ephraim of Katonakia. So his plan is to send these two, Father Haralambos, who I'll talk about soon, and our Father Ephraim. He wants to send them to Bishop Chrysostomus of Florina. He wants to send them off the Holy Mountain. But because they're not yet registered with the Holy Mountain, it would be dangerous for Father Ephraim to leave the Holy Mountain because the police are still looking for him to make him do his military service. On the morning of their departure from Daphne, the port of Daphne, Yeronda Joseph, the Hesychgast, calls it off because he has a vision that they shouldn't do it. All right, so now, having his change of mind from being full-blown zealot to being now wanting to not just even be moderate zealot, but to cast his lot in with the Holy Mountain, Yeronda Joseph the Hesychgast sends our Father Ephraim and another monk to be registered on the Holy Mountain, and he sends them to Careis, and this would allow them to be ordained on the Holy Mountain. So that happens, they go there and they're registered. Then what happens? Father Haralambos and our Father Ephraim now go to the Great Lavra for permission for their ordinations, and they were ordained by Bishop Athos, and Father Haralambos is ordained a deacon on Saturday on a Saturday in 1952, and then a priest on the following Sunday. And on that Sunday, our Elder Ephraim is ordained a deacon, and he's only 23 and a half years old at this stage. And interesting note, at the age of 80 years old, that Bishop Athos takes up the invitation to visit the Brotherhood at their small skeet of St. Anne. And leaping into the future, our Father Ephraim, our Elder Ephraim, is a deacon for 3 years, serving with Father Haralambos at the small skeet of St. Anne's, and then our Elder Ephraim becomes a priest after those 3 years. So what else happened in the meantime? Papa Ephraim of Katanakia, he remains with the Zealots because his elder Nikiforos remains with the Zealots, and he remains so out of respect to his elder until his elder's repose in 1975. Now I can talk about Father Haralambos. Right, so 5 months after Elder Joseph sided with the monasteries of Mount Athos and ceased taking some kind of zealot position, 5 months after that, Father Haralambos joins their brotherhood in 1950. At first, they aren't commemorating the Patriarch, but until sometime leaping into the future at New Skeet, they do. Right now, anyway, Father Haralambos, well, we did speak about him. He was born in Russia in 1910 as the nephew of our Father Arsenius, and he was born in Russia because, of course, the family fled there as refugees from 1880s. And Haralambos is the godson of Father Arsenius as well. Haralambos goes to Drama at 12, when he's 12 years old. They all have relatives there. Now, and in his late 20s, Haralambos serves in the army, and he's fighting the Italians in 1940. He's undergoing the German occupation in 1941. The Bulgarians are controlling Macedonia and Thrace, and obviously Drama. And as a layman, Haralambos is leading the Old Calendar movement there until 1950, and he, just like Elder Joseph, the Hesychgast, is disillusioned by the encyclical of their eminences Chrysostomus, Hieromanus, Christopher, and Polycarp. So he throws in the towel and says, "No, I'm leaving. I'm going to be a monk now. I'm just going to be a monk." So he arrives on the Holy Mountain on the 13th of September. He's 40 years old in 1950, and he joins his uncle, Father Arsenius, and the Brotherhood at the small skeet of St. Anne's, and he becomes a novice after 10 days. So that was life at the small skeet of St. Anne's, 1938 to 1953, and it covered the German occupation, it covered the war period, it covered the calendar issues, the 1950 encyclical, and so on. Now, the Brotherhood at the small skeet of St. Anne's, they have a frequent visitor, Father Theophylactus, and Father Theophylactus was a Rasifor monk, and he was under Elder Joachim Spezieris, in the heart of the Holy Merceries at a different place at New Skeet. Now, the life of the Brotherhood at the small skeet of St. Anne's was ruining their health, and Father Theophylactus encouraged them to move with him to New Skeet. What else happens? Yolanda Joseph, the Hesychast, taunts Father Theophylactus as a great schemer monk at St. Anne's, small skeet of St. Anne's, but Father Theophylactus remains residing at New Skeet. And just leaping into the future, Father Joseph the Cypriot is sent to live with Father Theophylactus in 1951. He's there for 8 years until the repose in 1959 of our Elder Joseph the Hesychast. So what happens? They do move to New Skeet, and this is 1953. And where is New Skeet? Well, it's in between St. Anne's Skeet and St. Paul's Monastery, 1 mile from each. And it's famous for having the Colivades fathers lived there, including St. Nicodemus of the Holy Mountain, and is under the jurisdiction of St. Paul's Monastery. And they are given 5 huts to live in. So the Brotherhood of Small Skeet of St. Anne is given 5 huts to live in at New Skeet, and after first staying with Father Theophylactus, and they regain their health. They're visited for a short while by Father Alexios, who's 18 years old. He stays with them briefly, but he is a demoniac and seems to be having well, no, we can't say that. Anyway, that's it. They are now at New Skeet, 1953. What happens now? Elder Joseph the Hesychast, health issues in his 50s, his years. He has hypoalbuminemia, and that's causing swelling. He gets anthrax. It takes him a year to recover from that. That's in 1957, December. And he's having heart attacks from cardiac insufficiency. And in 1959, so 6 years later, he reposes on the feast of the Dormition. And what else? Father Timothy shares hut with Father Haralambos, and later with Father Ephraim, and Father Pantaleimon of Boston is making visits to them. Right now, we're nearly at the end of the narrative. We're going to end it because Elder Joseph the Hesychast has reposed now, and we'll just touch on what the background is of what happens to his spiritual disciples. You can get more information about them from elsewhere, from other sources. Now, just note about the demographics of Mount Athos. In 1921, 5,500 monks. In 1959, at the repose of Elder Joseph the Hesychast, 2,500 monks, and in 1971, 1,145 monks. So they're dwindling in number, and they're also an aging population. And I think I have to say something about this. The reputation for delusion, for the rigors of the asceticism that Elder Joseph the Hesychast was leading, especially at the small skeet of St. Anne's, for example. It's kind of understandable with the older population, the large monasteries living idiorythmically, and I think that demographic background explains why and how a lot of younger monks were flocking to the disciples of Elder Joseph the Hesychast, actually because of their great asceticism. And the spiritual children of Elder Joseph the Hesychast, that's Elder Haralambos, Father Joseph the Cypriot, later of Vatapedi, our Elder Ephraim of Philotheo in Arizona. I'm going to add, not in this book, but Father Macarius from Philotheo at Skiti Maruda outside Carais. They were attracting their own brotherhoods. So Elder Haralambos and his brotherhood went to reinvigorate the monastery of Dionisio. Father Joseph, the Cypriot, did the same, took his brotherhood reinvigorate life at Vatopedi Monastery. Our elder Ephraim went to Philotheo, of course, and also his spiritual children reinvigorated life at Herapotomo, Konstantomonato, Karakalu. And that is the end of our narrative. That principally described the life on Mount Athos from 1921 to 1959, the principal figures and the locations, and the background of events, obviously the war years, the German occupation, the Greek Civil War, and of course the calendar issue. This video will be a part 2 sequel to the first video, part 1, about Elder Joseph the Hesycgast in terms of who, what, where, and when. And the source material for this book is by Elder Joseph of Vatopedi, also known as Elder Joseph the Younger, or Elder Joseph the Cypriot. And here are the details that I can use from this book to supplement the information already in part 1 of the series. So our Elder Joseph the Cypriot was born in Cyprus in 1921, and he took the name of Socrates in the world. Now, when he's aged 16, he joins the Cypriot monastery of Stavrovouni in 1937, and he's there till 1945, when he's 24 years old. In that monastery, he took the name Sophronius as a monk. Then he went to Mount Athos, and for 2 years he was looking for a spiritual father until we know that in 1947 he joins the Brotherhood of Elder Joseph the Hesychast in 1947, 1948. Right. Now, it's worth going to Wikipedia to look at Elder Joseph the Younger, Elder Joseph of Vatopedi, Elder Joseph the Cypriot, to get a lot more information, because in part 1, after the repose of Elder Joseph the Hesychast, it was just stated that Elder Joseph of Vatopedi, he got his own brotherhood, he went to Vatopedi and populated that, but there was a lot more in between that, and I won't go into it because it's off topic, but you should look at what he did after the repose of his Elder Joseph the Hesychast, and until he finally got to Vatopedi. All right, back on track. When the Brotherhood were with the elders Joseph and Ephraim the Barrelmaker in Katonakia, those two elders, Joseph and Ephraim the Barrelmaker, they were brothers in the flesh, natural brothers, and they were from Epirus, which basically is getting up to what we know now of as being Albania. But they weren't the only two brothers. There were 4 of them. There were 4 brothers in the flesh. The other 2 were Nicholas and Nicodemus. We know from part 1 that, more information, Daniel the Hesycgast was liturgizing in his own chapel, in his own place, a katisma, meaning it has a chapel, as we know, in the place of St. Peter the Athonite, and that was, as we know, out near the Great Lavra, beyond Gria Nera. But it seems that while the brother, Francis, soon to become Elder Joseph Hesycgast, and Father Arsenius were at Katonaki, were out with Elders Joseph and Ephraim the Barrelmaker, they were confessing, these two were confessing to Daniel the Hesycgast, because St. Basil's wasn't far from where Daniel the Hesycgast was, and obviously they wanted to confess to him. Right. At St. Basil's Skeet, Father Ephraim, later of Volos, joined them there, as we know, and Father John from Epirus, again, we can call it the location of Albania. One detail worth noting is that when the Brotherhood moved to the small Skeet of St. Anne, Father John stayed at St. Basil's Skeet. And, of course, Father Joseph, Elder Joseph, the Hesycgast brother in the flesh, Father Athanasius, joined them there at St. Basil's Skete. Now, when they moved, as we know, to the small Skete of St. Anne's, and 1947 or 48 thereabouts, our elder Joseph the Cypriot, we know, joined the Brotherhood there. But at first, he was refused. They said, no, we just have no space. It's a precipitous cliff. There's just no standing room there. But they prayed over it for one night, and he was accepted the next day. Confirmed by this book that we're using now, confirms that detail that it was because of the post-war situation and the civil strife there, it was common for the monks and the dependencies, the outlying districts, to go to work for the large monasteries, for economic reasons. Another detail about the life at St. Anne's Skete is that this elder Joseph, the Cypriot, the younger, and our elder Ephraim, Johnny Moretes, of elder Ephraim of Philathea and Arizona, they were the ones that put pressure on elder Joseph to allow them, the younger ones, to follow the extreme strict regime in terms of prayer and fasting that they were doing. So that was a good detail to know. Another detail is that while they were there at the small Skete of St. Anne's, St. Joseph the Hesychgast was sending food. Even though they had no food of their own, he was still sending whatever food he could to other elders, infirm elders at Carulia, southwest Mount Athos. Another detail is that when they finally decided to move to New Skete for their health, it was actually for the health of the younger ones that the elder Joseph the Hesychgast agreed to move, because the young ones, Joseph the Cypriot and Ephraim, Johnny Moretis, their health was getting wrecked by the regime at the small Skete of St. Anne's. So I thought that was interesting. And in the previous video, part 1, we learned that when they went to St. Basil's Skete, the huts that they were given, I didn't mention it in that video, but they were wrecks. There was no floor, no hardly walls, no roof, no windows, no doors. But the reason that I've learned from this book is that in the Civil War, the government of Greece had put all of the shepherds and their flocks on Mount Athos for their own safety. And the shepherds ran wild over Mount Athos. They were just ripping up floors, burning the wood, so that's why the huts at New Skete were in such terrible condition when our Brotherhood arrived there. Now, final factoid, just like at St. Anne's, they built a chapel to St. Forerunner, to St. John the Baptist, the Forerunner. The reason was our elder Joseph could hardly walk around because of his swollen legs, because of the hyperalbuminemia. Anyway, they really needed their own chapel. And the same here at New Skete. Again, they built a chapel of their own, again dedicated to St. John the Forerunner. In this third video about Elder Joseph the Hesychgast, I'm using yet another text, and it's this book about his spiritual child Haralambos. And we'll use this book to corroborate information that we already have and gain further details to supplement the picture that we've already formed. So, as we know, Haralambos' uncle was the Father Arsenius that joined the layman Francis, who was to become Elder Joseph the Hesychgast. And in the world, this Father Arsenius, by the name of Anastasios in life, the reason he became the godparent to Haralambos was he wanted to become a godparent before Anastasius went to pursue monastic life himself, because there was a Pontian belief that unless you become a godparent, the Lord will put a stone in your embrace in the afterlife. So anyway, carry on. More details. This book confirms Haralambos' whole family were adhering to the old calendar. And further, we also know, and this book confirms, that Haralambos wanted to become a monk, but he was pressured to remain in the old calendar cause. They wanted him to become a married priest, and that deferred his time to become a monk. Now, there's an incident worth mentioning. So in 1941, the German occupation, there were rebels, Greek rebels that were joining, both Bulgarians and the Germans, and they were massacring everybody. And Haralambos was captured and sentenced to death by the rebels and the Bulgarians. They were in Drama, really close to the Bulgarian border. But he was delivered by a miracle of St. George. Okay, 1944, the other thing that was forcing Haralambos to defer his plans to become a monk was just before his father went into repose, his father Leonidas obliged Haralambos to become the head of the family and look after his younger brothers and so on, which Haralambos did until his brothers were finally graduated college. Now, another event, just leaping into the future before we come back, but it pertains to family matters, it's worth mentioning. After Elder Joseph's repose, so this is really late, this is 1961 now, our Father Haralambos, he went to Thessalonica to make his own mother a nun. Right, now let's go back. We know one unusual detail, that when our Haralambos became a monk, he actually kept his name Haralambos, and that is just an unusual thing, and that's worth knowing. Now, here's something personal that I want to say. In the first video in the series, I mentioned Elder Makarios of Skiti Maruda. Makarios was 16 or 17 years old, a teenager, and this is much later, but it's worth knowing. Elder Ephraim of Philatheu and Arizona, before he went to Philatheu, Elder Ephraim was at the Russian cell of St. Artemius from 1967 at Provata, and that's why I mentioned Makarios in that earlier video. And just personally, I had the honour of staying with this Elder Makarios for a week or so at Skiti Maruda. I was a stupid, awful novice from Serbia, but Elder Makarios hosted me very beautifully, and I wasted his blessings horribly. Right, back on track. Skipping ahead, okay, at the small skete of St. Anne, our Father Haralambos is a priest. It's worth knowing that he was doing daily liturgies there at the small skete of St. Anne, and that was from midnight, and of course took hours and hours and hours because of all of the names to commemorate. Now, that's basically it, because the rest of this book is about Elder Haralambos rather than Elder Joseph the Hesychgast. So I will just whiz through, but it is worth reading this book to get the full picture there. So we know that the Brotherhood went from the small skete of St. Anne to New Skete from 1953 until Elder Joseph the Hesychgast reposed in 1959. And then our Elder Haralambos had his own brotherhood of 5 members that went till 1967. But anyway, just coming back to when the brotherhood moved to New Skete, I've got the maths here. I don't have the names. 7 brothers were joined by 3 more. There were 10 brothers. I mentioned one chapel to St. John the Baptist. They actually had 2 chapels at New Skete, one to the Mother of God. And their occupation there at New Skete was making prosphora seals. Right. More details that I'm going to whiz through, but before Elder Joseph the Hesychgast reposed, he did bless his spiritual children to form their own brotherhoods and report formally to Father Arsenios. Right, what happened there? From 1967 to 1979, they went to Buraziri, and I think this was a dependency of Gelandar. It's worth knowing that in 1967 there was a military coup in Greece, and Mount Athos was administrated by a retired general appointed by the military, and there was a brief 3-month stint of Elder Haralambos' brotherhood at Xenophontos in 1975, and then in 1979 Elder Haralambos went to the monastery of Dionysium. And the last couple of points, so towards the end of his life, he reposed in 2001. He was having heart attacks, and he used to go fishing because fishing was a remedy for heart attacks. And he used to send fish that he caught to Papa Ephraim of Katonakia, and that must have... Oh, anyway. Next point. So Elder Haralambos reposed in 2001. He had been taken to hospital in Thessalonica, and but he reposed there, and it meant that even lay people, women, could venerate him. And then he was transferred to the monastery of Dionysium back on Mount Athos. In this part 4, I'm going to be using this book here about Father Arsenios to get further details about Elder Joseph the Hesychast. And there'll be a bit of repetition, but never mind. So we'll start with Father Arsenios as Anastasios from Pontus. He hardly knew Greek. He knew the Pontian dialect that had a lot of Slavic vocabulary in it, and he knew Turkish, and obviously later he learnt Russian. And as we know, he was in the Holy Land for 8 years, and he arriving there in 1910. And in 1918, when he moved to Mount Athos, he chose Stavronikita because that was the poorest monastery at the time there. All right, carry on. When they moved to St. Basil's Skeet, that was suggested by Elders Joseph the Hesychast and Father Arsenios, and I didn't say this before, the reason was to get their Elder Ephraim the barrel maker away from being exploited and overworked and underpaid at Katonakia. And St. Basil's Skeet, moving up there, that was, I think, the highest up the mountain in the region. Another fact about St. Basil's Skeet, that Father Matthew, later of the Matthewites, at St. Basil's Skeet, where he was living, he used to preach to the other fathers there from a pulpit during their common communal gatherings there. And this book here kind of contradicts the other book that I had when it said that Elder Ephraim the barrel maker. Here, this book says he's the nephew and not the brother of Elder Joseph at Katonakia. Right, here are a few more details about Elder Joseph the Hesychast, or Francis, and Father Arsenios. So Elder Joseph the Hesychast, and as Elder Joseph the Hesychast, not just as Francis, and Father Arsenios, they used to walk barefoot everywhere, and they never got frostbite even when they walked in the snow. And when they were walking around, they used to act the fool with passers-by, and that helped gain them a reputation for delusion. Another detail, they got their particular pattern for conducting their vigils from 2 other elders, and that was Elder Kalanikos that I mentioned in the first video here, and also Daniel the Hesychast. And another detail worth knowing or marking is that Father Arsenios, he was the strongest one, and he was doing all of the mule work, the carrying things up from the dock, etc. And he used to do that not just for his brotherhood, but for all of the elderly fathers around. For example, especially around the small skeet of St. Anne's. And another fact that emerged here from this book was that Elder Joseph the Hesychast, he started to allow himself to take oil with food, principally because the younger monks had to take oil. All right, now we'll switch to Elder Ephraim of Katonakia with a few more details. So Elder Ephraim of Katonakia, he was saved from tuberculosis. His life was saved from tuberculosis because he was under Elder Joseph the Hesychgast made him eat well. And jumping into the future a little bit, Elder Ephraim of Katonakia, he was a frequent visitor to Buraziri and Philotheo after the future brotherhoods moved to those places. And now I'll talk about Buraziri. So Buraziri, that place, it was dedicated to Saint Nicholas. It's located near Karayus, and in Russian, Mlegaya Tserkov, White Church, or Bela Tserkva in Serbia. It was a dependency of the Serbian monastery of Hilandar, and at the time there was only one Russian father left there, and he was Hierodeacon Ioannikios. And at first he didn't want the Greeks to move in, and he was negotiating with Father Haralambos, who could speak Greek, but the second day he changed his mind and he welcomed the Greek Brotherhood to move there, and he stayed on there until his repose. And besides himself, there were 8 poor laymen, caviotes, living there as by arrangement. And after the Russian Hierodeacon Ioannikios reposed, then the new Brotherhood paid off the laymen to move, so it could just be. All right. So why did the Brotherhoods move to Buraziri and Provata? Well, from New Skeet. Well, they went there because the Brotherhoods just got too big for New Skeet. So the Brotherhood at Buraziri were there for 12 years, 1967 to 1979. Now, I'm not sure how the math stacks up here, but anyway, the note in this book is that Elder Arsenius was 85 years old when they moved to Buraziri. Elder Arsenius, while they were at Buraziri, Elder Arsenius took some of his monks on pilgrimage to Everon to venerate the Portaitisa icon of the Mother of God. And what about Provata? Well, Provata, I think it's the cell of Saint Artemius, also Russian. That was near Philotheu. And what else? While Elder Haralambos was at Buraziri, he was assisting spiritually at the Athonite Ecclesiastical Academy. And the final little detail that I noted here from this book was while they were at New Skeet, Elder Arsenius was blessed by Elder Joseph the Hesychgast before the latter's repose to be the governing elder at New Skeet. So with the move to Provata and Buraziri, Elder Arsenius, of course, blessed Elder Ephraim of Philotheo, future Philotheo, blessed Provata for them on his way, Elder Arsenius, to Buraziri. Right, now we'll talk about New Skeet. I've got the note here. It's one of the largest skeets located on the northwestern side of the mountain. And while the Brotherhoods were there, and even after the repose of Elder Joseph the Hesychgast, many monks would go there for confession and also, ask to stay and join the Brotherhoods. And that's how the Brotherhoods of the children of Elder Arsenius grew there at that location in New Skeet. Right. Now, just jump back in time a bit, back to Father Theophylactos. So he was at New Skeet under his elder Joachim Spezieris, but with the repose of his elder Joachim Spezieris, Father Theophylactos started going to, as we know, to the small skeet of St. Anne's from New Skeet, and he transferred the Typicon, the pattern for night vigil, from the small skeet of St. Anne's back to New Skeet. And two more little details about Father Theophylactus. He reposed in 1986, but every summer he used to travel to the Peloponnese to encourage the monasteries there. And I've been trying to work out who the 7 brothers were that moved to New Skete from the small skete of St. Anne. And all I'm able to think of is Elder Joseph the Hesychast, Elder Arsenius, Elder Athanasius, Elder Joseph the Cypriot, Elder Ephraim to be of Philotheo, Elder Johnny Moretius, Elder Haralambos, and I'm guessing the 7th might have been Elder Theophylact because he was tonsured there at the small skete of St. Anne's, I'm not sure. And we know that when the 7 brothers from the small skete of St. Anne went to New Skete, they were joined by 3 more. And I've got a detail here that 2 of those 3 were Fathers Neophytos and his natural brother Kirill, and they came to New Skete from the skete of St. Basil's when the brotherhood from the small skete of St. Anne's went to New Skete. Okay, that's the best I could do with that. Another detail about New Skete. 5 future abbots came out of New Skete. One of those became a bishop. All right, let's a few more details this time about Philotheo. So the brotherhood at Provata of Elder Ephraim to be of Philotheo, they moved as a whole to Philotheo. And Father Athanasius, he spent the last 2 or 3 years of his life at Philotheo, reposing in 1984. Now we're going to talk about Elder Paisius the New, so there's some overlap here. 1968, Elder Paisius supervised many monks, remotely, and that included Father Vasilius, and Father Vasilius, was the first abbot of Stavronikita and Iveron when they became Cenobitic, and more connection with the monastery of Stavronikita. Elder Paisius resided in the cell of Father Tikhon near the monastery after nursing Father Tikhon until his repose. And now, interestingly, Elder Paisius, he used to visit Buraziri to consult with the fathers there, and in return, Elder Haralambos used to visit Elder Paisius from Buraziri, as well as Elder Haralambos used to also visit the elders Ephraim, both of Kathonakia and of Philotheo. So, nearly at the end of this video, at the monastery of Dionisio, Elder Arsenius, after moving there, he adapted to Cenobitic life as he became more elderly, and he reposed there with the former abbot of Dionisio, Father Gabriel, in 1983, and they were the same age. And of course, Elder Arsenius went to Dionisio along with Father Haralambos and the whole brotherhood in 1979 from Buraziri. And Elder Haralambos, anyway, had already been the spiritual father to the monks at Dionisio.